the parts that you have. Prior to January thereabouts, people who took the listening test would refer to the parts as sections, but afterwards, from January down to this time, they are known as parts. So rather than saying there are 4 sections, you say there are 4 parts in the listening test. So look at each of the parts and what you're likely to hear and what you have to do at each of the stages. Before we move into the parts, I must say that for most of the listening sample tests that you find around, you would hear an example before the main thing happens. That has been stopped, and so on the day of your test, when you go, you just zoom straight into the actual listening test without the examples. Then also, you are not likely to find page numbers because they made some slight changes, and as part of those changes, you don't get to see page numbers on the question papers. So you should be able to listen to the conversation or discussion going on and know where each of the information is presented as questions on the question paper. The first part of the listening test is always a dialogue. You hear 2 people and they'll be talking about social everyday issues. For example, you hear somebody calling into an office to make inquiries, to make a complaint. You may hear 2 friends having a discussion about going to the theater, to the restaurant, or anything that pertains to our daily life and activities. You have 10 questions to answer for the first part, and these can be subdivided depending on the structure of the questions that you have. You need to listen to get specific information, the names of people, names of places, time, and other specifics or details that are given concerning certain events or certain articles that are mentioned in the discussion that they are having. At the end of this, you move to part 2, and that is always a monologue, which means that you get to hear one person giving a presentation, sort of, but this is also related to our social everyday lives. It could be about a project, it could be about a company, or very often it could be a tour guide who is taking you on a tour to a tourist attraction. And if it's a tour guide, then you should know that you would have to do a lot with the cardinal points. You have to deal a lot with directions. For example, the person tells you that if you have to find the scarecrow, you take the first turn on your left and then move up north, and then on the left hand side of whatever there is the scarecrow. You should be able to follow these directions that you're receiving. And I'm mindful of this aspect because as Ghanaians, it's not too easy for us to give and receive directions. And so at this point, you would have to take extra caution. And what I always recommend is for you to move along with the tour guide, not by getting up per se, but using your finger or your pencil or your pen to trace that on the map that is provided on the question paper, because that is what you have to use to answer the questions. So if the tour guide asks you to take the first turn on your left, you make sure that you trace that with your finger or with a pencil so that you can find the answers to the questions you have under that. Then you move on to part 3, and that is always a discussion. You get to hear between 2 to 4 people. The maximum you would hear would be 4 people, and this moves away from social everyday issues to something academic or something related to the workplace. You may hear students having a discussion on something about school, or you may hear a lecture having a discussion with students, or if it's at the workplace, you'd hear employees having, workplace related discussions. For most of the questions, you have multiple choice options at this point. Not all the questions that you encounter have multiple choice for part 3, but often that's what you encounter. And one thing that makes the part 3 a bit challenging is that all the options you have, something will be said about them. They would mention them, something would be definitely said about them. It is up to you to determine which of the options that you have is correct. For example, you'll be given 4 options to choose one. And then all the 4 options, something definitely will be mentioned about them. But then just one of them answers the question. And that would be based on the question that you have. So at some point, you need to be able to listen very attentively, focus on the question that you have, and get the answer from the information that would be presented on that. The last part is a lecture. And once it's a lecture, it will be something related to academics. And it could range from agriculture to astronomy to anything at all, any subject at all that is worth discussing in an academic setting is what you're going to hear when you get to the 4th part. You have 10 questions also over here. So in all, you have 40 questions to listen. The lecture also demands that you pick certain specific information from the whole lot that you would hear on the day of the test. So